Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on Enterprise TMS in the Cloud. I'm Adrian Gonzalez, President of Adelante SEM and host of Talking Logistics, and I will serve as today's moderator. It's certainly a pleasure to participate in today's discussion about this timely and important topic. I've been researching the transportation management systems market now for over 18 years, and obviously a lot has changed over that time period. What's interesting is that even though there's a lot of buzz and attention on cloud solutions today, TMS was actually one of the first enterprise software segments that went to the cloud more than 15 years ago. And although we've used different terminology over the years, such as software as a service or on demand, the reality is that TMS in the cloud is well established. That doesn't mean, however, that the architecture and capabilities of today's cloud TMS solutions are the same as they were 15 years ago. And what I find is that there are still lingering misconceptions about cloud TMS, especially as they relate to on-premise applications. So the goal for today's webinar is to understand the current state of enterprise TMS in the cloud, address some of the misconceptions that might still exist today, and provide some insights and advice to companies that are beginning their TMS journey. So joining me today is Ryan Bloor, who is the Logistics Services Director at Celestica, who will share the process that Celestica went through in selecting a cloud TMS solution, and Karen Sage, CMO at MercuryGate, who will shed some light on the current capabilities of cloud TMS solutions and address some of the questions and, in some cases, misconceptions that companies still might have about cloud TMS. But before we dive into the conversation, just a few housekeeping notes. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets that you can use. If you have any questions during the webcast, and then we're going to leave some time at the end for questions, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. And we're going to try to get to as many of those as we can at the end of the program. But if we run out of time or not able to provide a full answer, we'll be able to answer them later via email. Also, a copy of today's slide deck is available in the resource list widget that looks like a green folder at the bottom of your screen. To maximize the screen, you can expand your slide area by clicking on the maximize icon on the top right of the slide area or by dragging the bottom right corner of the slide area. And if you have any technical difficulty, please click on the help widget. It has a question mark icon and covers common technical issues. And finally, an on-demand version of this webcast will be available approximately a day after today. And it can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. So with that, Karen and Ryan, thank you for making the time to be with us today.
It's great to be here, Adrian.
Thank you for inviting me.
So great. So Karen, I'm going to start with you first. Karen, in your role, I'm sure you had the opportunity to speak, with a lot of companies that are looking for an enterprise TMS. And I'm sure as part of those conversations, the on-premise versus cloud topic comes up. I mean, what are some of the key points or questions that get raised during those conversations?
So it's interesting. We do get a lot of people who actually approach this before they even talk about features of the TMS. They talk about it, we want it on-premise or we want it in the cloud. And what's interesting is there's a couple different ways to look at this. There is obviously differences between architectures that are on-premise and those that are in cloud. But there's also, an important piece of this is to talk about the delivery mechanism. And then, so really keeping those two separate. Talk about the architecture as one thing, and then talk about the delivery, because you can have a cloud-based system actually delivered on-premise. And so there's, differences in terms of what that means. In terms of a lot of in terms of the big thing that we see in terms of people who are looking at on-premise solutions, typically they choose on-premise out the gate because they say it has enterprise capabilities. And, they really equate that with the on-premise, and we'll talk a little bit later how that's not true, but some of the things that they'll bring up is, for example, you can customize and you can extend things that are on-premise. Not so easy in the cloud traditionally. The second one is separate instances of data to represent organizations, where, on-premise you could build that by building separate instances of the enterprise, not traditionally something that you would find in the cloud systems. Control and access to data is obviously a big deal. Again, people kind of have this notion where they think that the data is really locked into the cloud. And easily integratable with other systems. People feel like because if their systems are on-premise, that it will be easier to integrate with on-premise, TMS. We'll talk about why this isn't necessarily the case. And then update features. A lot of cloud systems, essentially they release new features and the entire cloud updates. Again, one of the things that has really changed in recent years in terms of looking at cloud.
Yeah, those are interesting. Those are all interesting points, Karen, and I think I see and hear a lot of those things as well. I'm kind of curious. Just a quick kind of follow-up question on that. Do you see some of those, points being raised by the transportation professionals, or are you seeing them raised by the IT folks within the companies, or a combination of both?
That's a great question. Typically coming from IT, although they sort of put an edict out into the organization and have their preferences, so it bleeds into the business leaders as well. Right.
Yeah, no, I mean, because obviously in today's environment, having ultimately the evaluation and selection process of a TMS or any enterprise solution, requires, good communication, collaboration, not just between the functional folks, but also the IT organization, and sometimes some of the biases or misconceptions, if you will, of one might influence the other.
Right. And what's interesting is sometimes there can be, edicts in terms of, must be, on premise for security reasons or other types of reasons. So you do definitely see this bias, before you even begin the TMS discussion. Right.
Yeah, that's very interesting because, at the end of the day, obviously delivery is important, as you mentioned, and obviously architecture, is important. So, the IT side of things is certainly important. But, to start the conversation with that topic versus, what are the functional requirements and how they align with what you need to do to, execute and plan, your transportation operations, it's kind of an interesting dynamic there. Ryan, I'm going to, before we dive into, Celestica's enterprise TMS journey and experience, I'm kind of curious based on what, Karen just said. Did you go into the TMS evaluation process with a preference or a bias toward on-premise versus cloud, or, any questions or concerns that, you had with either model?
Well, I'd have to say, Adrian, that there were a number of stakeholders involved when we initially started looking at cloud versus on-premise, and I would say that certainly folks closer to the project team were biased toward the cloud option, but at the same time, and you mentioned the IT community, there were some certain folks in the IT community that were biased towards the on-premise solution. And at the end of the day, we did certainly go with the cloud solution. Some of the key items that Karen mentioned were specifically the flexibility or the configurability, our ability to regularly ensure that upgrades were done. Certainly would think that the cloud-based solution certainly was the winner in that regard. When we initially went down this road, we did a full quantitative and qualitative analysis, which certainly did highlight the fact that the ability to upgrade on a more regular basis was definitely one of the potential benefits. And then at the same time, there was also the cost-benefit analysis. Many cloud-based solutions at the time did offer the pay-as-you-go model, versus having to, get a capital approval, having to amortize that over a period of time. Certainly pros and cons to doing that process. And then, lastly, some of the other items that were mentioned, the access to data. There was a perception that, the loss of control, the loss of being able to access the data on a very regular basis would be a concern. Certainly did not see any of those, having tested that through many years. But that certainly was a concern initially when we got into this. And then, lastly, I think I would say integration. We were certainly evaluating, on-premise versus cloud as it relates to, having to connect our ERP, having to connect all of our partners. And, would it be detrimental to having a cloud-based solution, if you will, to be able to ensure that we could, regularly upkeep that integration, beyond the initial integration with our initial partners, but the ongoing connectivity with, as the ERP changed or as additional partners were brought on.
Yeah, no, very interesting. I mean, I think it sounds like, based on your experience, I mean, you basically kind of validated or confirmed, some of the things that, Karen talked about there. And, I think it's interesting to me just hearing both of you talk is, how, this on-premise versus cloud really has in some ways come to the forefront of the, evaluation process for a lot of companies. Where I always kind of viewed it as something that was kind of secondary in nature, right? So it seems like this is a question that is being, addressed and wrestled with, if you will, right from the onset of this process. Karen, you talk about some of the, how some companies equate on-premise with, quote unquote enterprise class, right? And, on the flip side, some companies have some misconceptions or myths about cloud. And, one of the ones I hear a lot about is, this one size fits all. And, I kind of joke of it sometimes, when, we would have kids' birthday parties and we would have a grab bag of toys, of candy. We would always tell the kids, you get what you get and you don't get upset, right? And I think that's in some ways what some companies think about with cloud, a cloud TMS or any cloud solution is that, it's a one-size-fits-all solution and you either conform to the application or you can't use it, right? And I think a lot of companies feel that, obviously they may have some unique requirements or, ways that they want to handle certain processes. And if they view that the solution might not be able to align with the way they want to run the operations, that's something that they see as kind of a limitation, to a cloud solution. So this whole kind of customization, question, and the fact that, not recognizing kind of the ways that you can configure, if you will, a cloud solution to really meet the specific requirements of each company out there. I think the other thing that I hear a lot of companies talk about is that, the cloud solutions may not be as feature rich as on-premise solutions, so they're kind of a tailored down or skinny kind of version of an enterprise TMS solution. But when in reality, when you see a lot of the solutions today, they've got, not only as many, capabilities as some of the traditional on-premise solutions, but they actually bring some other value-added capabilities, to the table as well, as it relates to visibility, as it relates to connectivity with trading partners and things like that. I think one of the ones that I think had some validity certainly years ago is, weak planning and optimization capabilities. Like I said, the TMS in the cloud is not new. And certainly the first versions of cloud TMS solutions going back 15 plus years ago, they were primarily execution, centric. And really the technology wasn't there at the time to make optimization very viable, via cloud solution, just because of the amount of bandwidth that it took, and just a lot of technical constraints that were, involved there. I think you fast forward to today, and I think that's one of the biggest changes that I've seen, particularly with the advent of, cloud computing and the reality that today, companies almost have infinite computing capacity, and now you're seeing, a lot of this optimization and planning capabilities in today's cloud solutions be able to tackle problems that, quite frankly, were even difficult with on-premise solutions, years ago. I think related to that was kind of the slow performance, key. I mean, I think all of us, particularly with the early days of bandwidth, experienced slow internet connections. I think today, as bandwidth has kind of really exploded, I think that's become less of an issue. And then I think both Ryan and Karen, you both talk about the importance of integrating TMS with other, applications, because obviously TMS does not exist in a vacuum. You've got to integrate it with a warehouse management system, with an ERP system for orders, and other applications. So I think there was this kind of a view that a cloud solution made that whole process, more challenging than with an on-premise solution. Karen, any thoughts on kind of do you hear some of these things in some of the discussions that you have with prospective companies?
Absolutely, all of them. And I think it makes sense to tick them off, one at a time. I think, although that said, I think the industry has kind of picked them off one at a time. I mean, things like performance, we serve up a lot of metrics in terms of, uptime and reliability. And so there's been kind of a concerted effort really to change the discussion in terms of what that means in terms of being on cloud or not. Some of the things that are harder to really equate, because I think it's how the cloud architecture was really designed to begin with. The first one is really customization, and this is really meaningful in the TMS environment, because if you look at whether you're a shipper or a 3PL or a broker, it's all about differentiation. And so this whole idea of customization and being able to customize your TMS capability has a huge impact. So, when you look at a lot of cloud architectures, that, of course, isn't an option. One of the things that MercuryGate did was really build in the ability to use things called dynamic rule sets to basically have the capability to customize the workflow, customize the objects, and in very finite detail to really allow that extensibility. I think that another area that, this whole control and access to the cloud, if anything, I would say this is the year of the API. It's very much cloud systems have evolved from that, notion where it was sort of locked into the cloud. And so access, through a whole different variety of means to data in a self-serve way, and being able to control and really, define who has access to that data is really something that the cloud, architectures in general have put a lot of emphasis on. Scale and reuse is another. In terms of being able to inherit divisional policies through inheritance and reuse, using things like system-driven workflow and being able to customize steps and reuse steps. Like if you have a business process that's working really well, how you replicate that across the business. And finally, in terms of adaptability, again, sort of bringing up that notion of APIs, looking into the future as to what power embedded analytics and having the system really being able to adjust and be integrated with systems that are both on-premise and in the cloud, really has a profound impact in terms of really going beyond sort of this notion of on-premise versus cloud and to the future, where we're going to really start to talk about connected systems and things like that.
Yeah, those are all great points, and I think I'm going to, if we have time later on in the conversation, I want to, talk about where what's next with enterprise TMS in the cloud, certainly because there's a lot of obviously emerging technologies that are, beginning to get incorporated into TMS and other enterprise applications. Just kind of curious. I mean, one of the things that I always found interesting in with this whole discussion around cloud TMS is that in the early days of cloud, a lot of the thinking was that this was going to be a model that was going to be embraced first and primarily by small and mid-sized companies and not the very large companies. And in reality, when you looked at the data and you look at the adoption curves, it's actually been the large companies and those with the most complex transportation operations that have been the first to embrace, cloud technology. Do you find that dynamic the same within your client base and with the discussions that you have with companies?
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about that is it really forced us to solve a lot of these, sort of preconceptions about cloud. I mean, the whole thing about customization, if you think about a big brand of and really, looking at the TMS as an extension of brand, things like, having the ability to have reports that are branded as your company, or, having the ability to have the interface that whether it be a carrier, if you're a broker and having a carrier come into you and a shipper, being able to leverage that in ways that are unique to you. This capability has really been forced by the larger, entities, whether it be shipper or 3PL.
Right. So Ryan, let's talk now about your TMS journey, and certainly Celestica is a large global company with a complex supply chain. The type of profile that most people would equate with needing an enterprise class TMS. Can you walk us through your TMS journey? Starting a little bit background on Celestica, and then tell us what factors led you to look for an enterprise TMS, and what were some of your goals and objectives, and ultimately, what made you select a cloud-based TMS?
So, well, when we first started down this journey, we're talking, upwards of 8 years ago. So, some of the concerns that we've already discussed certainly were more prevalent at the time in terms of speed and flexibility and so on. The reason we went down this journey to begin with, though, to answer your question, was we were certainly looking to reduce our overall transportation cost. At the same time, we were looking to improve our visibility outside the four walls, and we were also looking to centralize data and really improve our overall reporting capabilities. So the evaluation process certainly did take into account, with those three main factors being there, all of the pros and cons to, on-premise versus a cloud-based solution. Just to give you a little bit of background, so we went down this path, as I said, about 8 years ago. Once we did the selection process for a cloud-based TMS solution, we actually started with our inbound transportation. Of course, that was upon go live. Prior to that, we went through the whole implementation, or I should say integration phase, with our ERP system, with the carriers that we were looking to connect up so that we could establish that visibility outside the four walls. And also, from a data reporting standpoint, as I mentioned, visibility to and access to the data for our supply chain community inside the four walls so that we could make smarter planning decisions as it relates to transportation cost. But from an execution standpoint, once we had that connectivity established, with the ERP and with the carriers, and that certainly has been an ongoing process over the last 8 years where, have we had to add or delete a carrier over time or enhance the connectivity with the ERP. I would say that doesn't happen nearly to the same degree. The connectivity that we did establish early on with the ERP was very effective from the standpoint of being able to provide that visibility to the supply chain community. So anytime create, change, delete a PO, we had that visibility, pushed into the TMS, and provided the supply chain team with access or with the ability to see, not only is the shipment moving outside the four walls, but also what's in that shipment, is what part numbers are moving on that shipment, which is something that certainly has been a benefit. But at the same time, as I said, we started with the inbound transportation. Once we did the integration, much of our supply base is in Asia. So being able to ensure that we had multi-language capability and things of that nature in place as we onboarded the supply base in Asia was certainly key to us. And at the end of the day, having gone through this journey for a number of years now, I can't say that there has been any limit to flexibility that was certainly perceived when we initially went down this path as it relates to a cloud-based solution. So certainly for us, it was definitely the right decision. The pay-as-you-go model as it relates to the cloud-based solutions that were being offered at the time, certainly that was validated. And certainly the cost savings element. So from a premium cost control, the ability to optimize our freight with that integration has been very effective. The ability to ensure that the correct mode is being selected real time has been very effective as well. So, so overall, I would say that, the cloud-based solution selection process, was certainly one that interested us at the time versus going on premise. We were leaning towards that initially. We obviously ended up going with that solution, and certainly that has proven to be the correct solution over time. I would have to say that, whether it be related to uptime or flexibility, or the pay-as-you-go model, there certainly has been no limitation whatsoever as it relates to going with a cloud-based solution. Some of the things that, as we started the journey, that certainly were in the forefront was the being able to ensure that we had to maintain the on-premise solution as over time. So having to go, as I mentioned before, having to get that capital, having to do upgrades on-premise, things of that nature were not attractive to the core project team. As I said, there were other stakeholders that had differing opinions, but certainly the core project team was leaning toward cloud-based and not having to go through those capital processes. So, so the pay-as-you-go model certainly proved to be the right solution there. But as we went through the journey, certainly we implemented our inbound. We ended up implementing the outbound for the balance of our manufacturing sites. Celestica is a $6 billion company. We've got 30 sites globally, a very complex supply chain process, and we needed to get a handle on it. And, the outcome for reducing our transportation costs and improving that visibility with a cloud-based solution was certainly something that we were able to achieve over time.
Great. No, great journey there. You mentioned a number of facilities that you have. I'm kind of curious in terms of the rollout. I mean, did you start out with a certain number of inbound, processes or locations just to kind of test it out and see how it went, and then roll out from there? Just kind of curious how you ended up rolling it out across the company.
Yeah, well, it was very targeted for really two main factors. Certainly saving cost was one of them. So we certainly went by, and it just so happens that transportation cost is very heavy on the inbound. So selecting those suppliers that where they were shipping on our dime and ensuring that we had that control using a TMS solution. We were like any other company out there, pre-TMS, where we would send out a paper routing guide, and we'd hope that they would follow it. And the process for ensuring that recoveries and serviceability and so on was something that we were trying to get a better handle on. And the TMS process certainly that we were targeting to solve that problem. So to answer your question, we certainly went after the high spend suppliers. They were on the inbound for us, but also at the same time there was certainly some serviceability solutions or serviceability problems that we were trying to solve as well. So it wasn't always about cost. It might be a supplier that has, they're shipping very, key components that, might be fairly inexpensive to ship, but at the same time, it's a very key component to the end product that we were manufacturing. So from a serviceability standpoint or from a customer satisfaction standpoint, having the visibility to where that even if it's an inexpensive to ship component, having visibility to where that shipment is to ensure that it gets to the factory, gets put in the end product, and we can ship that end product to the customer was another key problem that we were trying to solve. So yes, cost was a big problem we were trying to solve. That was certainly one of the elements that we went after from an onboarding standpoint, but so was serviceability in select cases as well. Right.
Great points there. We talked earlier about kind of the role of IT, the IT group in terms of being part of the evaluation process or having their concerns or requirements addressed as part of the process. I mean, one of the things I hear from a lot of transportation executives that have gone down the cloud path is that historically they've always been at the bottom of the priority list from an IT support standpoint, and they've got their hands full with whether it's a global rollout of their ERP or some other IT projects. And in some ways, over time, the IT group has been more receptive to if there's less that they need to do from a standpoint of having to do this internally, the better, if you will. So just kind of curious in terms of, the role that IT played in this and what, what kind of support they provided throughout the way and things like that.
Yeah, so the key role that IT played for us was certainly managing the security elements, ensuring that the solution, if we were going to be putting a lot of our data into the cloud, and again, this was 8 years ago, so, ensuring that the data was secure, that there was, clear separation between suppliers, that we had the ability or the comfort level that our data was going to be secure for, for years on end. That all of those elements had to be written into the contract and had to be vetted by IT. So that's really where the key role that they played there as well. And by the way, I agree 100% with some of your points in that, being in, a transportation leader in the company, I wanted to have that flexibility with being able to ensure the uptime and there are conflicting priorities. There's no doubt. So certainly there was, with the cloud-based solution, there was a flexibility element that I could definitely appreciate at the time, even though I was evaluating both solutions. So overall, IT certainly was a key component to the selection process, but for us with the cloud-based solution, it was more from a security standpoint, and they also obviously helped us in the evaluation of hardware cost capitalization, versus the pay-as-you-go model. So they were certainly they had a seat at the table on the core team.
Great. Karen, before we start wrapping up here, I'm just kind of curious. You're obviously familiar with the Celestica journey here and everything that Ryan just said. Any common threads between kind of the experience and the journey that Celestica has gone through with some of the other companies that you work with?
Yeah, I don't think it's atypical. I think, it's one of the things that's been great about Celestica is that reason, sort of trumps some of the predispositions towards certain things, right? And in terms of views, and so making sure that we could have a real discussion on things like uptime and what that looks like from a contract standpoint was really key in terms of making sure that expectations were met on both sides.
Great. So, Karen, as a way to wrap up, what advice or recommendations would you give to companies that might be wrestling, with the on-premise versus cloud, question?
So, I think to separate sort of what you're looking for in terms of the features and functions and sort of major attributes of the software is really important to sort of, to have that discussion, in parallel with how you're going to deliver the software. Like I said, we're pretty agnostic in terms of, we have people who have on-premise instances, and so, realize that it's really about the architecture and what the architecture can support. And then you need to focus on how it's going to be delivered. And I think you need to separate those two discussion points.
Yeah, that's a great point. Two of the things that I hear a lot with companies that are, evaluating, TMS solutions is, number one, I think we talked about it a little bit here, is flexibility, right? Because it's the reality that, today's transportation environment and market and kind of how you're doing things is different than it was, last year, and a year from now it's going to be different, right? You're going to have you might have new vendors, you might have new customers, you might introduce new modes. It's a very dynamic market, right? So to your point, from an architecture standpoint, being able to support that flexibility in terms of being able to modify processes, introduce new processes, that's a critical factor that kind of raises to the top for a lot of companies. And then the other piece is, and this is something that's been getting more attention that I hear from a lot of companies, is usability, right? It used to be that when you talk to a lot of the TMS users historically, one of the big frustrations that they always had was if they wanted to execute something, they would have to click on 5 different things and open up 3 different windows. And I think what a lot of users are looking for today is the ability to configure the user interface in a way that aligns with the way that to see the information that they want and to be able to execute and the business processes that they're responsible for, all within a single screen, if you will. So I think usability and flexibility are 2 of the things that are important and arguably become even more important than how you actually deliver the solution. Do you hear that the same thing, Karen?
Absolutely, and in fact, we've actually invested a lot in terms of that, and it's really, people have different ways of working, and so, one sort of method, might be very workflow for somebody who's new at something, to get them through the steps, and then, but you also need that one screen and the ability to look at different sort of views on the problem and be able to switch back and forth very easily and seamlessly and pivot on certain elements. And so, it's usability is key. And again, it's an architecture discussion. It's an architecture discussion that does depend on cloud versus on-premise, but it's something that you need to have parallel in your, when you think about it.
Right. So Ryan, going to you now, I mean, how about you? I mean, what advice or recommendations would you give to companies that are, just beginning their TMS journey, but, particularly those that might be, again, skeptical about cloud solutions being enterprise class?
Well, I would definitely say that the perception out there that there's a loss of control is certainly a misnomer. We've not experienced any loss of control. And then of course the other one would be the perception out there that speed might be an issue. And I think you said it out of the gate is that with the increase in bandwidth, that certainly has gone away to a large degree. I've rarely, if ever, do I ever run into a situation like that. Even in the initial stages, that was definitely a concern, and that certainly has not been. So that's, for anybody, making that decision, loss of control, perception of speed issues are definitely fables. We've not experienced those issues, and certainly you talk about usability and flexibility. I mean, even a pay-as-you-go model, or the ability to change user interfaces without having to do any major changes or invest in upgrades is we've certainly experienced the tool as being very flexible to satisfy a number of different problems that our suppliers or internal users are looking to solve. So at the end of the day, I'd say cloud-based solution is flexible, very cost-effective, and certainly has yielded a sizable benefit for us.
Great. So we've got a few minutes remaining here, so I want to make sure that we get to some of the questions coming in. So if you do have a question for Ryan or Karen, please submit them now in the few minutes we have remaining. We do have a few in. I want to try to get to as many as we can before we wrap up here. Again, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So, Karen, let me just start with you. And I mentioned this earlier in terms of kind of the evolution of cloud TMS and some of the things that you hear a lot of people talking about today, whether it's the mobile applications, artificial intelligence, predictive analytics. Are all these things part of what a cloud enterprise TMS is going to look like in the future and moving forward?
Absolutely. I think a lot of that has to do with communication and sort of, being in the cloud and, having access to really cloud-based things. So like when you talk about electronic devices or, status, GPS status, and being able to look at the Internet of Things and sort of the richness of what that's going to provide and the access to it is absolutely part of this equation. I think, instead of sort of having your ability and your automation in kind of a walled-off garden, you really have to have this federated system where, you know, the system can learn to adapt and grow and really serve your needs in kind of an evolving way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, to me is really, this is in parallel to, you know, going back to one of those myths that we talked about in terms of, you know, cloud solutions not being weak on optimization or planning capabilities. Again, that might have been true, I think, you know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, particularly because of the limitations that you had with bandwidth and with raw computing power. I think today I'm continuously amazed at, again, you can almost say it's almost infinite computing power with parallel processing and things that the likes of Amazon and Google and Microsoft are doing with their, you know, cloud farms and computing farms. Just the amount and the sophistication of complex optimization problems that can be done now, you know, in a cloud environment. You know, Ryan, a question for you here, just going back to kind of your implementation here, and you kind of talked a little bit about how you rolled it out. You know, can you comment a little bit in terms of how long it took, you know, in terms of the initial phase and maybe the ultimate rollout?
Yes, absolutely. You know, so there was really two main integration elements that we looked at, you know, when we went through the implementation process. The first one being to the ERP, you know, outlining what data elements that we wanted to have pushed into the ERP, you know, identifying if we wanted any write-backs into our ERP, you know, depending upon what the users were looking for, mainly in the supply chain and transportation community. And then obviously the other element was, you know, that for us was connecting to all of our carrier partners, which certainly there were many more, but to a lesser degree, a lot of that could be replicated with some key, you know, identifying, you know, whether it be mode or and so on, something that we can replicate for specific modes. But you know, to answer your question, you know, we didn't find that. I think we were a little bit more apprehensive in terms of or shy when it came to, you know, identifying how long we thought that the integration would take. It actually went quite smooth from the standpoint of identifying what data elements we wanted to push in. We didn't actually have to go back and rewrite any of the integration. You know, 80-20 rule. I think we got it right out of the gate. You know, I would say it was you know, weeks to you know, I'd say 4 to 6, you know, up to 8 weeks from an ERP standpoint in our case, and certainly from a carrier standpoint, much less. One of the things that I will say is that you know, when it comes to integrating with carrier partners, you know, where there is the ability to cut and paste, if you will, existing connectivity. You know, leveraging that as much as possible is certainly something that, you know, being part of a larger community has its benefits. So that can certainly cut down on some of the integration costs.
Yeah, that's a great point at the end there. And that's always been one of my, you know, when I talk to people about the value-added benefits that a cloud solution has over, let's say, an on-premise, is, you know, from a connectivity standpoint and being part of an existing network, if you will. And you know, certainly not necessarily always plug and play, but it certainly, you know, helps to expedite and facilitate, you know, that connectivity aspect of a TMS deployment. You know, Ryan, I'll leave the last question to, you know, for you in the couple of minutes we have here remaining. You know, what's next, right, for Celestica in your TMS journey? You know, and any new initiatives or ways that you're looking to leverage a TMS to drive continuous improvement?
Well, there's really two elements. You know, certainly, well, three if you count, you know, ongoing maintenance of as the supply chain changes, and we have to, you know, add, delete carrier connectivity and so on. Not so much on the ERP side, but certainly businesses and our supply chain changes over time. So there's certainly a maintenance element. But that's old hat, if you will, at this point. I mean, you know, we've certainly gained the experience and are able to maintain that. But from a new, you know, what we're looking at to I would say to enhance or to add as additional capability or even get better at, you know, in the TMS world would certainly be, and I think you mentioned it off the top, is, you know, does the cloud have the capability to, to help you when it comes to, optimization and doing offline analysis rather than execution in a cloud-based solution. That's something that we are certainly taking advantage of more and more all the time, using some of the optimization tools and having that real-time communication, through, whether it be from the cloud-based solution through web services with some of the key carriers, or in-house in the actual cloud solution with the one-stop shopping with the contracts that we've loaded rather than going to the carriers via web services. That certainly is an area that we are expanding on and training more of my internal users to take advantage of those capabilities to provide either internally through optimization projects. Or even if requests from some of our customers and helping them or showing them the capabilities that we have and experience that we've gained over the years in that place. And then lastly, the other area that we're looking at is the user interface. We certainly, Karen, I think you mentioned it. There is a lot of flexibility in the user interface, and certainly, weighing, changing the interface and how you communicate that out to your supply base is something that has to be evaluated. But there's definitely a lot of flexibility there that I think we can take a look at and enhance the usability of the tool and maybe customize it a little bit more for our users over and above what we've already done.
Great, a lot of great points there, and with that, we're kind of out of time here. If we didn't get to your question, like I mentioned earlier, we'll be able to follow up with you via email afterwards. And if you missed part of the webcast for whatever reason, you want to listen to it again, it will be available on demand, via the same link that you used to log in today. So with that, Ryan, Karen, thank you very much for making the time to be with us today.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Great. I want to thank those of you that joined us, and certainly, we addressed many of the topics that I think related to enterprise TMS in the cloud. Certainly, there's a lot to this topic, but hopefully we were able to, answer some of the questions that you had and kind of shed new light on, what is the current state of the market. So again, thank you all for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you in a future webcast. Goodbye.